Welcome to India Business Hour. I'm Shireen Bhan. The headlines that we're tracking for you this evening. India's exports rise nearly 7% in August. Shipments to the US see a sharp spike just before the 50% tariffs took effect. Imports down by 10%. Trade deficit narrows to just over $26 billion. America's top trade negotiator Brendan Lynch arrives in India tonight to hold negotiations for the first time since the Trump administration imposed 50% tariffs. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and top trade advisor Peter Navarro maintain the rhetoric on India over tariffs and Russian oil. The next round of India-EU talks scheduled in Brussels between the 6th and the 10th of October. Commerce Ministry says India is looking to export more labour-intensive goods to the EU. Sources say negotiations are in a sweet spot and are on track to be concluded by year-end. Delhi is also in talks for an FTA with several nations, including Oman, Peru, Chile and New Zealand. President Trump says trade negotiations with China has gone very well and he will speak to President Xi on Friday. Also hinted a potential deal on TikTok's US business without explicitly naming the company. Market regulator SEBI waves the green flag for Pine Labs, Hero Motors and Orkla to hit Dalal Street. Danish multinational brewer Carlsberg is also exploring an IPO for its India business as per sources. The global CEO of HSBC is bullish on India. Pam Kaur says GIFT City is a big opportunity for the bank and businesses across the world. The bank is holding its board meeting in India. Pam Kaur is the first female CFO in the bank's 160-year history. The Supreme Court refuses to stay the Waqf Act in its entirety but limits the powers of district collectors, caps the number of non-Muslim board members at 3, stays the provision which mandates a person must be a practicing Muslim for 5 years to create a Waqf. The Supreme Court gives a clean chit to Reliance Foundation-run animal rescue and care facility Vantara, says no contravention of law was reported by the investigation team, says it is satisfied that facilities at Vantara are in fact exceeding the prescribed standards, also bars any court, tribunal, board from hearing any further complaints on the same allegation. The Delhi police arrest the driver of a BMW car that mowed down a bike, killing an official of the Union Finance Ministry, injuring his wife. The woman driving the BMW has been charged with culpable homicide. Israel steps up the Gaza offensive. 25 people, including children, killed in overnight strikes. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio meets Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu to discuss the fallout of the bombing in Qatar. Pope Leo raises concerns over rising CEO compensation and the gap between the rich and the poor across the world, cites the examples of Elon Musk's pay package, which could make him the first trillionaire. The Pope says we are in big trouble if money is the only thing that has value in the world. 15-year-old Owen Cooper becomes the youngest winner at the Emmys as Netflix drama Adolescence wins 6 awards. Apple TV comedy The Studio breaks records, winning 13 awards. HBO's The Pitt won the Best Drama Series and 2 acting awards. All of that coming up in just a bit, but let's begin with the day's market action. As always, the Sensex and the Nifty snapping an 8-day winning streak today, ending the day with marginal cuts. Nifty remaining above the 25,000 mark, though, but flat closed there. The mid-cap index up by about 0.5% or so, and the Nifty Bank also closing in the green, a flattish close there for our markets. But a mixed day for stock markets across Asia. Data from China shows the economic slowdown is deepening, retail sales missing expectations, and industrial output slipped to a 1-year low. Shares in China closing in the red, but flat close there. South Korea's Kospi hitting a record high after the country scrapped a plan to raise taxes on stock investments. So you saw the Kospi closing in the green. The Hang Seng also up in positive territory. Crude oil prices edging higher after Ukraine attacked Russian oil refineries. President Trump's call for NATO nations to stop buying Russian oil also supported prices. Brent gaining over 2% last week, hovering just over the $67 per barrel mark. Meanwhile, gold remains steady near the all-time high of $3,650. This is traders priced in a 25 basis point rate cut from the U.S. Federal Reserve next week. So that's the picture as far as the commodity markets are concerned. Back home, wholesale price inflation turning positive in August after 2 straight months of deflation. WPI stood at 0.5% compared to 0.58% for the month of July. The government has said the uptick was driven by an increase in prices of food products, manufacturing equipment, mineral products and transport equipment. Trade data. India's exports rose nearly 7% in August. This as shipments to the US saw a sharp spike just before the 50% tariffs came into effect. Meanwhile, imports fell by 10%. And the trade deficit has narrowed to just over $26 billion. Lata decodes the data for us. Lata, it was expected the rush to meet that tariff deadline, boosting exports.
Well, the surprise positive part is that considering we worried about tariffs for the better part of last 3 months, the trade deficit has actually gone down compared to last month and compared to year-ago levels. The trade deficit has come down to $26.5 billion. That's only goods, compared to $27.4 billion in July. Likewise, merchandise exports have gone up compared to year ago and compared to July. It's at $35.1 billion compared to $32.89 billion in the previous August. Services exports are also up. Of course, they were never under threat. In August, they are up to $34 billion compared to about $30 billion year ago. Overall, if you take India's goods and services, the deficit is meaningfully low at just about $5.9 billion for the month of August. So let's come to the exports to the US itself. April, August, that is the 5-month exports to the US is actually up at $40.4 billion versus $34 billion a year ago. Now, here we have to come to terms with the fact that this is because there has been advance sending of exports, advance booking to escape the 50% tariff. The 50% tariff became applicable on August 7th, but orders had been pre-booked, and the understanding was that up until September 17th, the goods that landed on US shores will be charged the 25% tariffs, and that's why there's clearly been advance booking, leading to this good nearly 20% increase in Indian exports to the US for the first 5 months. Likewise, April, August imports from Russia are also somewhat subdued at $26.4 billion compared to $28 billion a year ago, clearly because even the price of oil has fallen. But let me leave you with one slight worrying number. The April-August imports from China have risen very sharply to $51.5 billion compared to $46 billion a year ago. That's a jump of about 10%. So that's perhaps the source of, continued worry.
Well, Lata, many thanks. That's the trade data for you. America's top trade negotiator, Brendan Lynch, will arrive in India tonight to hold negotiations for the first time since the Trump administration imposed 50% tariffs. This comes as U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick once again reiterated the demand for India to open up its farm products to America. Trump's top trade advisor, Peter Navarro, also maintained his rhetoric on India and continued with the tirade that he has been on. Now, here's what to expect. Brendan Lynch arriving in India tonight for the talks to resume.
Use that money to buy Russian oil, and then the Russians use that to buy weapons, and then we as taxpayers have to pay more for the defense of Ukraine. And so how can that be? And watching Modi on a stage with China, which has been its longtime existential threat, and Putin, that was an interesting stretch.
Well, that's Navarro. Nothing new there in terms of statements. The next round of India-EU talks will take place in Brussels between the 6th and the 10th of October. The Commerce Ministry said that India is looking to export more labor-intensive goods to the EU. We learned from sources that negotiations are, and I quote, in a sweet spot and on track to be concluded by the end of the year. Abhimanyu here with more details. Abhimanyu, things picking up pace as far as the India-EU talks are concerned.
The 14th round of India-EU FTA negotiations is slated to take place in Brussels from the 6th to the 10th of October. It remains to be seen how early both the sides are going to decide on conclusion of talks for a free trade agreement, even as there have been indications that both the sides intend to conclude talks by the end of this year. Now, India is trying to increase exports of its labor-intensive products, whereas the EU wants more access for its automobiles and liquor into the Indian market. India is also engaged in FTA talks with several other geographies, including talks for a BTA with the United States and FTA talks with the Eurasian Economic Union, Oman, Chile, Peru, New Zealand and Sri Lanka. Apart from that, India expects to offset the losses to its fisheries exports due to the US tariffs by exporting more to the European market in view of the recent nod which has been given to India's exports of fisheries products into the European market. So clearly, India is hedging very clearly as far as its export avenues across the world are concerned, not just to ensure more jobs and exports from India, but also to ensure availability of intermediary products into the Indian economy for production of several goods, as well as to maintain certainty in supply chains and certainty in prices across the country.
All right, many thanks. The bunch of FTAs that India is currently negotiating, Abhimanyu, thanks. United States President Donald Trump has said that trade talks with China and Spain have gone very well and will conclude soon. He also hinted that a deal may have been reached to keep TikTok operational in the US. On Truth Social, President Trump said, and I quote, "A deal has been reached on a certain company that young people in our country very much wanted to save," end of quote, adding that he will speak with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday. And more news from President Trump. He wants companies to stop reporting earnings every quarter and report them only twice a year. Trump says this move will save money and help managers focus on running their businesses. Trump also said that China looks at businesses with a long-term view, unlike the US. Some experts like Warren Buffett have also questioned the need to report quarterly earnings, saying it hinders the ability of a company to think long-term. American corporations have been reporting quarterly earnings since 1970. Will we see a change in the quarter-to-quarter phenomena? That's a big question. Let's see what the SEC and corporate America have to say. Market regulator SEBI has approved the initial public offerings of Pine Labs, Hero Motors, Okla India and 3 other companies. Together, these 6 IPOs are expected to mobilize at least 9,000 crore rupees. They come amidst a busy primary market with 55 firms already raising about 75,000 crore rupees this year. And more on IPOs. Here's a money control exclusive, call it the Hyundai effect, but yet another MNC IPO is brewing. Denmark headquartered global beer major Carlsberg is evaluating the listing of its Indian arm. Ashwin here with the story that he broke. Ashwin.
So what we're picking up from our sources is that Denmark headquartered global brewing major Carlsberg is now evaluating a potential initial public offer or IPO of its Indian arm. What we're given to understand from sources is that Carlsberg has kickstarted early discussions with investment bankers in India and in fact has invited a clutch of select advisors, namely the likes of Citi, BofA Securities, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley. These are the likely investment banks that have been invited by Carlsberg for making pitches to form the IPO syndicate and to commence work on this proposed IPO. Now, these are early days and therefore there is no finality in terms of the size of the proposed IPO or the valuation. But remember, this is a key one because this is yet another MNC that is betting on the attractive Indian multiples. In India, of course, Carlsberg made an entry back in 2007. According to the last annual report, they are number 2 and they have a 21% market share. They compete with the likes of listed peer United Breweries, which is of course the maker of Kingfisher. They also compete with Ab InBev. So that's the local scenario. But one also needs to keep in mind that this move or this plan is in fact being executed at a time when Carlsberg India is doing rather well. As far as FY24 is concerned, the revenues exceeded 8,000 crore rupees and in fact the profits of the Indian arm also increased 60% to around 323 crore rupees. So that's the latest that we're picking up. Carlsberg Global has declined to comment in response to a query from Money Control. Back to you.
Ashwin, many thanks. The global CFO of HSBC is bullish on India. Pam Kaur says Gift City is a big opportunity for the bank and for businesses across the world. HSBC is holding its board meeting in India and Pam Kaur is the first female CFO in the bank's 160-year history.
So for us, India is a very important part of our franchise. Right from the time when the first ATM came in India in 1987, it was an HSBC ATM. Now, many years later, it's the country which has the largest number of our colleagues and employees based in India. You know, we have 45,500 people. So we are deeply embedded in India. I have my roots in India, and I must say, I feel really proud in terms of how the country's economics has progressed over the years.
Well, that's the global CFO of HSBC, Pam Kaur, on the optimism with respect to HSBC's business here in India. Shares of Vodafone Idea rallying in trade today. This after reports said that the Supreme Court will hear the telecom operator's plea on the additional adjusted gross revenue dues on the 19th of September. Now, Vodafone Idea had moved the court seeking to quash the Department of Telecom's additional demand of AGR dues worth 9,450 crore rupees. It urged a recalculation of dues. So let's see what transpires in that hearing. Shares of rice exporter KRBL fell by as much as 12% after an independent director on the company's board resigned, citing corporate governance issues. This is the biggest single-day drop for the stock has seen in over 3 years. The independent director, Anil Kumar Chaudhary, cited issues that have persisted despite efforts to address them, which posed professional and ethical dilemmas. However, the company's chairman and managing director, Anil Mittal, has maintained that the independent director's allegations are false and baseless. Take a look.
It was finally decided in the board meeting that we are going to have external auditors to vet the allegation made by Mr. Anil Chaudhary. And it will take about 30 days' time to go into the details of those allegations. And there are about 6 or 7 allegations made by him. And I think so that things will come in a transparent manner after 30 days. According to me, only one director has made those type of malicious allegation, which according to me, as a management head, I would say it's all wrong. They're all false.
Well, that's KRBL, the stock under pressure today. Up next on India Business Hour, the Supreme Court gives a clean chit to Reliance Foundation-run animal rescue and care facility Vantara, says there's been no contravention of law as was being alleged. That and more when we return. Catch all of CNBC TV 18's news and updates on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, X and Jio Hotstar. The Supreme Court has refused to stay the Waqf amendment in its entirety. However, it has stayed certain provisions of the Act. This includes a clause which mandates that a person must be a practicing Muslim for 5 years to create a Waqf. The CJI-led bench also said that not more than 3 non-Muslim members should be included in a Waqf board and not more than 4 in the Central Waqf Council. The court also said that while no case was made out to stay the whole statute, some sections needed some protection. And staying with the Supreme Court, it has given a clean chit to Reliance Foundation-run animal rescue and care facility Vantara. The court in its order has said the investigation team, that's the SIT, which had been set up by the Supreme Court, has not reported any contravention in law. It added that all imports of the animals have been made only after issuance of valid permits. Further, the court also barred any court, tribunal or board from hearing any further complaints on the same allegation. Team Vantara has responded, saying that the SIT report and the court order make it clear that doubts and allegations against Vantara were without any basis. Ashmit is here now to take us through the court's order. Ashmit, so the SIT was set up by the Supreme Court. The SIT report being presented in the Supreme Court today. Take us through what the order says.
Well, Shireen, I'll begin with this figure, 40,633. That's the total number of animals that were acquired, that were cared for, rescued at Vantara. And in all those cases, the finding of the SIT, which has been headed by no less than a former Supreme Court Judge, Justice Justice Chalameshwar, the finding is there is no violation. That's the big takeaway from this SIT, a finding which the Supreme Court says that it has absolutely no hesitation in accepting that the SIT's recommendation that there is absolutely no violation with respect to the laws. And we're talking about a large number of regulations as well as guidelines. Bear in mind, the SIT was in fact probing, was in fact looking whether or not there's been any violation for anything between the Wildlife Protection Act or the Foreign Trade Act, the Indian Penal Code, the new Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, the PMLA. All of these guidelines, all of these laws is what the SIT was investigating, and the finding is that there's absolutely no violation, a finding that has now been adopted by the Apex Court, saying we have absolutely no hesitation. These are the number of, in fact, the legislations they were looking at. The finding again being no violation. What the Supreme Court has also observed as a part of its order, and this is echoing what the SIT essentially said, that the acquisition of the animals, it's gone through a very multi-layered, multi-jurisdictional statutory approval process. There are detailed procedures, there's detailed documentation, that there is a comprehensive process that has been followed. It's not been a fly off the cuff. It's not been makeshift arrangements have not been made. These are very detailed compliances that have been put forth. Further, in fact, goes on to say that even in cases where animals had to be imported, that has been done only and only after there had been a proper vetting process under a permit. And the Supreme Court's finding essentially is that, look, behind the permit itself, there is such a comprehensive layer of due diligence that once the permit has been granted, there's absolutely no need, the Supreme Court says, to go behind the permit and to ask questions there. So the finding is that even in case of import, there are valid permits that in fact Vantara had in terms of acquiring these animals. The Supreme Court here makes an important reference here on page 4. Here the Supreme Court says that there have been repeated requests, complaints, allegations that have been thrown at Vantara, but repeatedly the findings given by various courts, tribunals has been that there is no violation, which again gets confirmed today by the SIT as well. Another interesting aspect on the issue of conservation and preservation, what the SIT concluded is that on various benchmarks, the standards that had been provided for care of the animals in question far exceeded the prescribed standards, which in fact is something that even the Apex Court concluded far higher than the prescribed standards. In fact, at one point, the Supreme Court also makes references to global benchmarks and then goes on to say that even in those cases, the facilities that are being provided at Vantara significantly higher than even the prescribed standards, not just by domestic standards, but also by international standards. Further, on the issue of the complaints that are concerned, here the Supreme Court, and this is a part of the conclusion of the order, here the Supreme Court concludes that given as how there are detailed findings, the SIT itself has given a detailed finding. In light of that, all the complaints, allegations that have been put forth, whether in the form of petitions, whether in the form of news stories, they all now stand closed. The Supreme Court looking keen to put a full stop to all these allegations and questions that are being raised. In fact, Supreme Court in fact goes on to say that Vantara in the past has been subjected to judicial scrutiny at multiple levels. And again, the finding has been no violation, that to permit this cycle of speculative complaints is not something that the Apex Court will allow, going on to say that this is something that would be tantamount to an abuse of the process, which the Supreme Court says it will not allow. And with that, and this is an important direction, the Supreme Court has said no court, no tribunal, no board, no judicial authority, statutory authority, or administrative authority will take up any further case as far as allegations, these specific allegations against Vantara is concerned. So clearly, a clean chit coming in as far as the SIT is concerned, the Supreme Court adopting them and granting a waiver, making it clear that all is kosher, all is well at Vantara, the animal rescue facility.
Ashwit, many thanks for joining us. The Delhi police has registered a case of culpable homicide a day after senior finance ministry official died when a BMW hit his motorcycle. The police have arrested a woman who was allegedly driving the BMW. 52-year-old Navjot Singh worked as a deputy secretary in the finance ministry. His wife sustained minor injuries in the accident. The accused husband, who was also in the car with her, has also been named in the FIR. The police say the speeding car lost control while trying to overtake. Flipkart, the e-commerce marketplace arm of Flipkart, has managed to tighten its belt this year. Its consolidated loss narrowed to 1,494 crore rupees in FY25. Meanwhile, revenue rose 14% to 20,807 crore rupees. However, its expenses rose to 22,310 crore rupees. Myntra turned into a star performer. Its net profit jumped more than 20 times from last year to nearly 549 crore rupees in FY25. Revenues also grew almost 19%. Swiggy has launched a separate food delivery app that will cater to the price-conscious consumers called Toing. The app will go live in Pune and will run separately from Swiggy's main platform. Most meals will be priced between 99 and 150 rupees. It offers lower platform fee, no packaging charges, and free delivery on orders above 99 rupees. International news. Israel steps up the Gaza offensive. 25 people, including children, killed in overnight strikes. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio met Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu to discuss the fallout of the bombing in Qatar. Russia launched 87 drones and missiles on Ukraine in an overnight strike. Ukrainian defense forces said they've shot down or intercepted 59 drones. This comes a day after Russia claimed to have intercepted over 360 Ukrainian drones in a day. Ukraine struck one of Russia's largest oil refineries in the Leningrad region. Meanwhile, Romania has summoned Russia's ambassador after a Russian drone reportedly entered its airspace. The 77th Primetime Emmy Awards wrapped up last night with Apple TV comedy The Studio and Netflix's Adolescents winning big. The Studio broke previous records to win 13 awards. HBO's The Pitt won the Best Drama Series and 2 acting awards. Adolescents won 6 awards, including top honors for its lead cast. And with that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of India Business Hour. Thanks very much for watching from all of us here on the show. We'll see you shortly. Goodbye.
तो ऑलरेडी है पैच। हेलो
आपण डायल केलेला नंबर सध्या व्यस्त आहे, कृपया नंतर प्रयत्न
ये क्या
करा।
मैं लगा रहा हूँ फोन।
आपके द्वारा डायल किया गया नंबर अभी व्यस्त है, कृपया
उठा रहा था तब तक कट हुआ। हाँ हाँ चल आ गए। हेलो हाँ बोल।
अभी
कॉर्डलेस पे
हाँ जो सामने रखा है
1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 दूसरे इसमें पैच करो ठीक। चलो हेलो 1 2
नहीं आ रहा है।
ठीक है आ रहा है
इस पे किया 5 पे करना।
5 पे किया ना ये 5 ही है। हेलो हेलो 1 2 ठीक है 5 पे कर रहा हूँ। ये तो पहले से पैच है ना। चार पाँच अच्छा ये अभी 5 में कर रहा हूँ। भाई तुम निकाल के रख दो पता है इसको। हेलो 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 ये 5 नंबर पे 5 नंबर। हाँ 4 पे डालो अभी। पता नहीं चल रहा कुछ आवाज भी जा रही है ना पता। हेलो हेलो आवाज आवाज आ रहा है। 5 नंबर पे लगाया आवाज आ रही है।
ठीक है।
हाँ ठीक है अभी 4 पे। हाँ ठीक साइलेंट पे अभी। हाँ जी चलो 1 2 3 ठीक है ना।
ठीक है वाइंड अप कर दे।
ओके 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 बाय।
यहाँ पे दिख नहीं रहा है, एक ही है।
4 नंबर 4 नंबर
4 नंबर यहाँ पे नहीं है।
वही भी होगा। अच्छा छोड़ दे आ जाएगा ना।
हाँ मैं वही करो आ जाएगा उसमें क्या।